on June the 14th, we got a phone call. My daughter was how she was crying on the phone. I mean, profusely crying and saying, "Mom, mom, mom." And of course, my wife was saying, "Leanne, Leanne, what is the matter? Leanne, Leanne." And then she repeated it again, "Mom, mom, mom." And it sounded exactly like her. And my wife kept saying, "Leanne, Leanne, what is the matter?" Well, then a police officer came on the line, but he said, "Your daughter was in an accident. She ran into the back of another car, and the lady that was in the car that she ran into was pregnant. So they transported her to the hospital, and then he said, your daughter is going to be arrested and charged with operating a cell phone while driving a motor vehicle." So then he said, your daughter can't talk anymore because she has a cut on her forehead and she's bleeding out her nose. He said she probably has a broken nose. So now in the background, the sirens were going. You could hear traffic in the background. You could hear people talking. It sounded exactly like there was a traffic accident there. So he said, stay stay by your phone. And he said, a public defender will be calling you shortly. So he hung up. And of course, by this time, we're on the edge of our seats and he's got our emotions where they need to have them. So it wasn't very long. A public defender called and she said, "My name is Sarah Williams. I'm the public defender here in Indiana." And she said, "I'm going to be handling your daughter's case." She said, your daughter she's going to be charged and arrested for operating or being on her cell phone and while operating a motor vehicle. So, we said, well, okay, all right, you have our attention. And she said, now, when she comes in front of the court, she said, uh, she's going to be charged and she's going to go to jail. So she said, but you can post bail for her if you want to, and she won't go to jail. So we said, well, how much is the bail? And she said, it's $15,000. And she said, can you post bail for her? And of course, we said, well, yes, we can. So she said, well, when you get that money, she said, call me at this phone number and I'll tell you where to deliver it and who to deliver it to. She said, but it has to be cash. Can't be a check. Can't be anything else. It has to be cash. So she said, before I hang up, I'll give you the docket number and my phone number. And she said, as soon as you get the money, call me. So that was the end of the conversation. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, it might be a scam. I said, but I don't know. I said, it sounded so real. I said, the background noise, the ambulance, Leanne crying. I said, it sounded exactly like her. And I said, maybe it's true. So she said, well, we got to get to the bank. And I'm going, no, we're not going to get that kind of money until we know who we're going to give it to and what's going on. So she said, what are we going to do? So I said, well, at that point, Jake came into my mind right away. I said, I'm going to call Jake. Said, Jake knows all the phone calls. He'll know who to call, what to do. He'll know what buttons to push. So I called him, left him a message to give me a call back right away. I've got an emergency. And we waited for a while.
I became involved in this incident after the Holtz-Apples had talked to the so-called public defender, Sarah Williams. As I was talking with the Holtz-Apples, I could hear the emotion in their voice. I could hear the worry that this was real, that their daughter was actually in danger of going to jail if they did not provide this bail money. But also, and I applaud them that they had great common sense in realizing that this could be a scam. There was something subconscious about this incident that I believe resonated with them, that things were not all on the up and up. So I actually called the Indiana State Police and they had never heard of the jurisdiction either. Plus, I asked them if they were investigating any type of traffic crashes of note at the current time, or were or aware of any neighboring jurisdictions, and there were none. So not only could I find a local agency out of the county where this supposedly occurred, or near one of the towns, but also the state police had no idea either. So in summation, I think that if I were to give advice, and the Holtzapples did everything right. Yet yes, they were worked up when you get this kind of phone call. I have kids myself, so I can understand what this would do to a person. And as I had said before, how this kind of played on me a little bit, because as police officers, we naturally want to help people.
And meanwhile, Elva and I were talking, and she said, we'll try to call it Leanne on her cell phone. Well, her cell phone didn't work. Her husband's cell phone didn't work. So she called Troy's mom, which they were in Indiana, and she didn't pick up the phone because she didn't, it was an unknown number to her because we never talked to her. So she said, well, maybe I'll message her. So she messaged her. And at that time, she told Leanne, she said, I think your mother's trying to get a hold of us. Well, about that time, Jake called us back. He found out all the information. I was on the phone with him, and Elva was on the phone with Leanne. And Jake said, it's a scam. He said, it's all a scam. And I said, well, Leanne's on the phone with Elva right now, and they're sitting in Troy's mother's kitchen, drinking coffee in the morning at the kitchen table. And that was pretty much it. And we never made any phone calls, and never bothered with it anymore.
And I will kind of dovetail off of Mr. Holtzapple's account of the incident to kind of, as he's telling me this, to kind of break down some of the red flags that I noticed, and what I know about scams and how they operate. And Mr. Holtzapple hit it right on the head, that they were playing off of the heartstrings, as scams usually do. So when Terry first told me about the account, I found it very unusual that their daughter Leanne was able to say just enough to get their attention, but was not available after that. Whereas they would be able to ask her questions that would be able to reveal that the scammer, or whatever type of means that they were using, was not legitimately Leanne. The fact that she had these injuries and was still able to communicate. I can't see a police officer pulling a phone away from a person that early, and then taking over the situation. I've met Leanne before. She's a relatively strong woman, and I realize, supposedly being in a at fault traffic crash, I realize that it can be a disconcerting incident for her. But from what I remembered of Leanne, this did not sound right, that she was so emotional that she wouldn't have been able to say the bare bones of what needed to be communicated to her parents. And once again, Terry hit it on the head, is that in all this, if she's traveling with her husband, where is he, and why isn't he communicating, and why isn't he available to communicate? Because as the officer had informed the Holtzapples, is that both had sustained relatively minor injuries in this crash. So those are red flags right there. Also, the sirens in the background. The picture that Terry painted for me is that during this whole thing, there were sirens going on in the background at a static traffic crash. And by that, I mean one that's actively being investigated with, yes, there's probably police officers there. There's probably some conducting the actual crash investigation, doing measurements. There's some probably directing and controlling traffic. And then there's probably ambulance and fire on scene also. However, I've never been at a traffic crash where someone has had their siren going constantly for more than just a few seconds, because in reality, someone's going to tell whoever is blaring that siren to shut it off because work's trying to be done. The only time that sirens are really going to come into play is when police, fire, ambulance are trying to get actually to a destination in an emergency. So they had already reached that destination, and so they're not going to keep that going. So obviously, since this was an audio call, I think the scammers overplayed their hand in this regard, in including that detail in order to add legitimacy to the situation. I think they actually took some legitimacy away from the situation because it just didn't make sense. But I guess they overplayed their hand in the fact that, hey, the more sound effects and the more police jargon, equipment, or whatever that we can throw into this, they'll believe this. Another one is that for rear-ending somebody and getting arrested to the point where you're going to need $15,000 cash bail. I've arrested drug dealers that that barely got that bail. So $15,000 for the basic offense of operating a cell phone while you're driving. That was probably a little bit overplayed. Either that, or they probably could have thought of a different charge, something a little bit more serious. Now, if I remember from the incident, if I can think back to June, I believe the situation was, or the supposed situation was, that Leon had supposedly rear-ended a pregnant woman, but there was nothing really of, I think the pregnant woman was being taken to the hospital to be checked out, not necessarily that she was going to lose the baby. So we don't even know the seriousness of the charge yet. So really, this was another red flag in that just being involved in a rear end crash where, yes, someone's being driven to the hospital to be checked out. They're not seriously injured. They were not killed. It was a little bit overplayed to, number one, charge the operator with, for all accounts, what would amount to a summary crime in Pennsylvania, summary traffic offense for operating the cell phone while driving. And they don't even know what the extent of any injuries to the mother or the baby might be. So once again, the bail was overplayed, and also the charge was definitely underplayed for that amount of bail. Also, Terry hit it on the head about the public defender getting back to them within a matter of minutes. They say the wheels of justice turn slowly, and sometimes they're right. This was not an emergency situation where a public defender would need to get involved with that amount of immediacy. In fact, I know that a lot of court systems are different than they are in Pennsylvania, but whether or not the public defender would have even been involved at this point was suspicious. Not to mention the fact that the police officer is actually being the go-between between his law enforcement actions and a public defender was also something that was not sitting right with me. Almost like he was in league with this public defender when, even though the police and defense attorneys can work together for a better resolution of a case. It's Police officers are not agents of defense attorneys by any means. So I really found it suspicious that a police officer would be getting involved to this point where he's actually doing business for the public defender. Public defender with the docket number, when she called the Holtz Apples, the docket number was different from any docket number I had ever seen. Usually, a docket number will include what case number it is for the year, and will have some element as to the current date that the charges are filed. Whether that usually being like a month and a year that the charge is filed. Not to mention a district justice number. The number that the Holtz Apples were provided absolutely did not include any of these elements. So I wanted to get involved in this to help out the Holtz Apples, but just their anxiety over this and the matter that they're upset because I'm close with them, that actually started to upset me also. But they did everything just right, and they slowed down because scammers are going to basically play on one thing, and that is on the heartstrings of particularly family members. for a situation, because when it comes to family, we'll do anything for our families to help them out, and if it involves giving, sometimes an exorbitant amount of money, we'll do that. We'll do that to help. But the also what they'll try to take away from you is they'll try to take away the aspect of time, which potential victims or people that have been victims of scam, they don't realize that time is on their side. And what the scammers try to do, and I believe that's why they introduce the element of the emotions, is they try to take away that strength from victims, that the time is actually on the victim side or the potential victim side, and they'll put that immediacy in there that you have to act absolutely right now to do this, or else we're going to serve this warrant on the person, or else they're going to go to jail, or whatever the case may be. And I don't and a lot of times, other people who have actually become victims of these things, unlike the Holtz apples, let that be taken away from them. So I have to applaud the Holtz apples in this regard, that even with really no law enforcement experience, they they apt they acted appropriately, and things really started to strike a chord with them about things seeming fishy.